I had been involved in reading books, and I was at art school, and I went to the theatre, and I enjoyed cinema. And if you came here, all of those things had a place here, and music. Richard's going to talk about the music. So to be in this building at that point was to be able to see theatre, hear contemporary music, speak to visual artists, be part of performance art at that time. So I have never, from that moment, thought that dance didn't match and coexist with other art forms and with other disciplines and with other ideas, and that was an incredible beginning.
Yes. You mentioned the music, you mentioned the theatre, you forgot to mention the rather dodgy films.
I wasn't sure we were going to mention the dodgy films. Now that you have let me mention the dodgy films, I would like you to know that Swedish Blue turned up here, and they were definitely blue movies. And at that time, Richard and I worked for somebody we both called Pink Floyd, who was the box office manager, and it was our job to sometimes care for some of the clientele who came to witness the films. So we had a broad education.
The thing is, perhaps you wouldn't know this, but Robin put his own and his family's money into buying this building. And he famously signed the lease, holding a letter in his hand from the Arts Council saying, "Whatever you do, don't sign it." And he was at a press conference and he simply didn't say anything. He just took his pen out and signed it. And he got absolutely the most extraordinary things in here in order to fill the building with activity and in order, quite honestly, to get money back. When I was a student, he gave me a scholarship, and in return for that, I worked in the box office. I was hopeless. But I had the most extraordinary time because in the office, which is now the theatre office, was in those days called Studio 6, that's where Cornelius Cardew used to come and work with his musicians. In the bar where you had a drink before was where Gavin Bryars and John Tilbury and another group called AMM used to rehearse. The building was also home to what was originally called the Pierrot Players and then became the Files of London. So Harrison Birtwistle and Peter Maxwell Davies were here. So for me, who was really interested in music, I really didn't do any work. I was just sitting in the box office listening to these strange sounds. And there was marvelous theatre here. There was a wonderful group from Paris called the TSE, Argentinian actually.
We both fell in love with the same man. Or maybe it was a different one.
You fell in love with a gay man, I fell in love with a straight man.
That's true.
Hopeless. Ain't that life? But it was a fantastically free time. Nothing was set. That was what was so extraordinary. The students who were here were very, very lively. They came from all sorts of backgrounds. And the curriculum was made up as we went along. Robin took a shine to me, for which I was extremely grateful, and he would take me to the pub at the end of each term and say, "What shall we do next term?" And we had the most amazing teachers, including someone who was very, very influential on me, Pitt Geddes, who was the first, a Norwegian woman who was the first Westerner to learn the Chinese Tai Chi Chuan, and she taught it in England. She was a real pioneer. And Robin had her come in here, and we all studied Tai Chi. And actually, that piece called Blue Schubert Fragments has a lot of Tai Chi Chuan in it, because that's what I was studying at the time, and I absolutely loved it. So it was that kind of blotting paper organization that for all the students and the company, everything was starting. It was a terrific, terrific time, and it was an amazing way to begin what became really, established enough to last 50 years. I don't think any of us thought that would happen. We were just living on the day, in the moment, weren't we?
We were. It was very brave. I think, I don't know, when you're young, you're not necessarily brave because you're so open to everything. But Robin was incredibly brave because he was, not a young man. He was a hugely energetic, focused, extraordinary individual who, and you mentioned to me earlier in the year, was really really interested in the avant-garde. And I don't know, we don't use that word anymore, but at the time it was that he was interested in things that were ahead of their time. And I think things that happened here were with the time, if not ahead of the time.
Yes, I think that's true. There were a lot of art centres in London then.
That's true.
The ICA was just starting. There was a wonderful place called the Arts Lab. There were lots of small venues. And so this was actually one of the best because this auditorium's so extraordinary. And it was a drill hall. And when I came in here with Robin, there were balloons from a party and buckets to catch the rain. And actually my brother built the seating with Norberto Chiesa.
Drill hall.
Yes, the artists'
it was the
rifles, the artists' rifles. That's why Robin, who had lost his legs in the Second World War, still had a very strong feeling for things military, and he also loved the fact that this was based here was a regiment that was more or less specifically for artists. Wilfred Owen came here. We still have sort of strange walking tours who come past on a Saturday. They're showing this building where Wilfred Owen had been a soldier. So it was an extraordinary time. So I want to ask you then, if we had this very exciting beginning, and I always consider myself very, very lucky. I consider myself, my career has been based absolutely in an unplanned way on being in the right place at the right time. I've had the most extraordinary time working in dance. And I hope that some young person will feel the same right now. But for me, in the 60s, there were the most extraordinary companies coming here. That's when I saw Merce in 1966. Martha Graham came here in 1967. A lot of American modern dance companies were brought sometimes by this extraordinary theatre presenter called Michael White. And London was a truly international city then. And I saw things which I feel absolutely blessed that I saw and have never forgotten. I hope every young person involved in the arts feels that continuously. But when you're young, I think I can remember, you're so wide-eyed and open and agog to learn everything, and so it becomes everything becomes a very special experience. And that's how this place started, with a whole group of people who felt that. So I wanted to ask you how, being here at the beginning, and we both stayed here quite some time, how you feel that carried on in what you've done since. You moved on, I moved on. I came back I went to Rambert for 12 years. Someone once said to Madame Rambert, how you must be so thrilled to have discovered another choreographer. And she said in her very honest and rather truculent way, I didn't discover him, Robin gave him to me. I should have said, Robin lent me to you, because I came back, which was wonderful. But tell me, you've done lots of different things since you left here.
I sense that learning dance, learning choreography, being with people, dancers who are absorbed in the learning of movement, is one of the great teachers. And anybody who might not have learnt dance won't appreciate that, because they have a perception of it as something else, maybe something visual, in fact. Whereas I think those of us that study dance and are truly embedded in what a recognition of our total selves is capable of, then dance is one of the most extraordinary teachers I can imagine. So I think I looked at Robin occasionally, and Robin might have looked at me, and again I think we felt, and I'm sure there were many others like that, but I'm just talking about this moment in which both of us might admit that we had arrived quite raw to this occasion, and that by arriving raw and being in the presence of people who did know more about dance than us, we realized that we were in this learning situation. And I think that's what I've carried on with. How can you constantly find a way of being in a learning situation? Because there's no point from my perspective of saying you know it, because you don't. Because that's no fun. Once you know it, that's no fun. So the learning experience is absolutely amazing. And I think that was so present here. And I think it should be present in any learning situation. But I seriously believe, and sometimes I laugh because I think maybe dance and choreography are the arts for the 21st century, because we are having to address who and what we are totally, who and what we are culturally, as a gender, as a national, as a culture, as an environmental taker-upper of space. And in some ways, dance might give us some of the best learning that we can in order to deal and fruitfully and creatively with this situation. So, you know, this little 17, 18-year-old that began, that's been my continuous line. And you?
Well, I've never forgotten this building. I've spent probably more years of my life here than anywhere else, which means that I might just be lazy and stick in the mud. But I actually have strong loyalty to this building, and I have strong loyalty to the school. I didn't have an easy time in the school because the Graham technique was very hard for me to do. Robin believed in it utterly. He was completely inspired by Martha Graham, and he had the good sense to ask Martha who would be the right person to come here, and she said that he should ask Robert Cohan, and I think later on she regretted it because she really missed him. But Bob was an extraordinary teacher, and Bob was also, when we first started, an extraordinary performer. So there were things that I saw in this theatre when it first opened, such as a piece by Martha Graham called El Penitente, danced by Robert Cohan, with Martha's part being danced by Naomi Lapsison, who was the most extraordinary performer, and one other dancer, Bill Luther. And those performances are etched on my mind. You know, where I was sitting where you are now, and I was just absolutely breathless. So those kind of things stay with you. They stay with you. And Robin, what I really loved about Robin's belief was that it made so much sense to me. He had had a very good education. He was very interested in the Elizabethan period. He was very interested in Shakespeare. He was involved in the quarter centenary Shakespeare exhibition at Stratford. But he felt that the Western world was too biased towards thinking, and that dance would redress that balance. And when he looked at other cultures, he had friends who knew a lot about dance in Bali. He had a very wonderful, eccentric woman who had studied a lot of African dance. And he had a sense of world culture, and he saw cultures where dance was important as having actually a better balance between thinking and acting. And I think he convinced a lot of us. He was very, very passionate about what he believed in. And Bob too, they both believed in the same thing. And I think that's still here. I was absolutely thrilled to hear Claire Connor say earlier this evening upstairs in the speech that the place wants to have more dance in the world. And Robin would have been standing behind her going, yes, here. He absolutely believed in that. So there is a sense of continuity. And there's a sense of change. Things are changing. I'm moving on. Things are changing. And I know that Robin always thought that dance was about change. Dance, you can't. If you move, you're changing. You can't just stand still. So for me, I've been here all this time and have felt hugely privileged to be supported by the place. I consider myself a backroom boy as an artist. I go into the studio and and I work at what I love, and I work at what I care about. And I don't rush around necessarily showing it to the world in a noisy way. And I think I've been given huge freedom to do that. And I absolutely agree with Sue. You never turn around and say, okay, I know what I'm doing. But in certain ways, I'm now confident enough to be proud of what I'm doing. Whereas when I was younger, I always thought I was learning. And suddenly, at a point, only about 5 years ago, I thought, oh, I actually know that. And funnily enough, in a strange way, therefore, the way I choreograph has changed because I change things much more in the studio. I'm much more meticulous. I need to get details right. I don't want it to leave that studio and come into this space until I absolutely know it's what I want. I used to wait and see. My kind of motto was always, let's see what happens. Try this, try that. I work very quickly when I make movement, don't I? And that was true right at the beginning. Sue and I'm sure we put that duet together very, very quickly. Actually, I've got a picture here I want to show you. I hope it'll show on the camera. When they finished down there, Monique and Nahum, that's me doing that. Skinny with long hair. Skinny, I was skinny in those days, I promise. You can see. That's not Sue underneath, that's Paula Lansley. But this is Sue with Tom Job doing the Nowhere Slowly duet. Can you see that?
Double work.
Is it the right way up?
Double work.
No, that's Nowhere Slowly. That's Nowhere Slowly. He's just picked you up like that, and he does that.
That's really...
Doesn't he, Monique? Is Monique there? Yes, yes. Didn't look like that from up above. This was when the photographer was in the ceiling at Riverside Studios. I'm not nostalgic, but
You're not.
But I love to look at images of dance, and I love to look at photographs. That's why, when I was upstairs, I was talking to you about Chris Nash, who's photographed so much of my work, and I think of him as a really important colleague. What else was I going to ask you? So we have questions.
My turn to ask you something.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, good. Okay.
No, you ask me.
Well, partly because there's two things you're leading into it. One is it seems you have so often spoken about loving dance and dancers, and I think that is where we are completely joined at the hip. We've ended up doing things in very different ways, but we are completely joined at the hip about this is an art form that really matters. But I'm wondering whether you can turn round and either talk about it not in terms of a technique, but in terms of a human endeavor, of a human attribute, but also, because I'm not quite sure about the time, so somebody might need to advise me of that, one of the ways in which you might want to do that is you've told me that this evening is a story, and it's a story that began with you making Nowhere Slowly duet for both of us, which when I watched them do it the day before yesterday in the rehearsal, I couldn't help, tears came to my eyes because my 20-year-old body was suddenly there, it was suddenly present. Now, how often is that possible for us? And again, I feel that's what makes dance precious, is because our body is the body we are. It's not our body, we are a body. It is a library, an archive of our experiences and our interactions with others and with situation. So I was just wondering whether you might guide us from Nowhere Slowly through wherever you want to go, but passing through why the human qualities of dance matter to you.
Just a small question.
It's what our dinners are like.
Listen, this is the truth. When I was at art college, I began to be fascinated by dance, but I was also fascinated by anthropology. And that's where I think I had an extraordinarily strong link with Robin, because of his interest in dance that came from other places. And as a student, I used to show these funny old films, which were all getting very torn and scratched, but they were full of the most marvelous things from all over the world that Robin had collected. I think right from the beginning, not quite knowing what I believed in, I believed in dance as an incredibly healing activity, and that it made connections between human beings in an incredibly strong and positive way. And so that's why I say it's a story, because in the duet there is a little story going on in its minimal way. I'm all excited, I run on, I say, come on, let's dance. And then when I look round, she's gone down to the floor again. And I go and I pick her up and say, come on, look, let's do this simple thing. And then as I'm doing it, I break and I turn around, she's gone to the floor again. So I'm trying to encourage her. It was about a relationship between two people. And it looks like he's finally made it work when he takes Monique up to the back there, or I used to take Sue, and we do these long stretches, which are such fun to do. I can still feel it, I remember. And you come down on the diagonal, stretching, and the music's going wild, the music by Terry Riley. And then, right at the end, she suddenly spins away and she's all quiet over there. And so when I used to go down, I used to go, okay, I give in. And I used to walk kind of straight past her and just put her on the floor. And that's what that picture is. So the dance is always about people. One of the films we showed here were films made by the Bauhaus of Oskar Schlemmer, and Oskar Schlemmer turned people into objects. I never had any interest in that. I really wanted human beings. And I think the most recent story, part of that story, is to see the students dancing to South Italian music. I love that part of the world. I love the culture in Puglia. And this extraordinary fierce dance, which is about something very serious, because the women in particular, the men go through the fields, and they this is historical, of course, they'd use the scythes and they'd disturb all the crops. And the women would then gather them, and the spiders would bite the women because they'd been disturbed by the men, so then they were angry. And there were tarantulas, the same as the ones in Naples, which gave birth to the tarantella. And the dance, there are two stories about that dance, one of which is that the energy of it shakes the poison out of the body. That's why I put all those shaking movements in. But the other story is that the women would feel poisoned and get very morose and depressed, and so the men would have this very, very lively music to shake them out of their torpor. I think they're very strong images, and then when you see the actual people dancing it, the steps are extraordinary. They're very, very light. They're very quick. And people often say, "Oh, Richard, you work with music. You must feel very strongly connected to Mark Morris." I use music in a very different way from Mark, but I feel connected to Mark because Mark started in folk dance, and so did I. So did I. When I was a schoolboy, we lived in the country near Windsor, and my mother used to get me out of the house by sending me to these barn dances. And I learnt these reels, and I learnt these Scottish dances, and I loved them. I loved them. And no sooner had I learnt them than I began to boss people around. And I became a menace. I was always saying to the postmistress, "No, that way." And a choreographer was born. So that's what I still believe in. I believe in the human power of people dancing together. And that's how I feel of a company. I feel a company is like that. And I think that came from Bob and Robin. They all believed in this same thing. You know, I'm sure, that there are many artists who are considered brilliant because they're so nasty. I don't have much time for that. I don't think genius has got anything to do with being mean. I think you can actually be really nice and be a genius, and I'm doing my best. We should keep an eye on the time. Has someone got the time? Because I should have my watch in here, but I don't know whether...
Somebody's waving. 5 minutes.
Very good. Is there anyone who would like to ask us a question? You'll have to ask Sue, because I'm as deaf as a post, but she can tell me what you're saying, and then we can take it from there. If somebody would like to ask a question. There goes a microphone. that's wonderful.
It's Birdie. Everybody knows me as Birdie. It's Brenda Last here. Richard, we're all delighted to be here, but we're so sad about this company of yours finishing. I'm devastated that, of course, some of the dancers that I've trained have worked with you, and Isabel, of course, and there's many people here. We are devastated that this company is not going to exist, because I do feel we're training lots of dancers and they're getting better and better all the time, but there's nowhere for them to perform. I mean, as a dance person, I think we should all be very worried about this, that we're getting fewer and fewer companies.
Okay.
I think I got the gist
Hi,
of that,
Birdie.
Birdie. There came a point when I thought if I fought for this company to continue, it might damage the place. And I didn't want to do that. The ways of the Arts Council are strange and mysterious. I don't pretend to understand them always. I've been very, very fortunate. I've had extraordinary support from the Arts Council, from really some, as it happens, 4 women who were all directors of dance, starting with Jane Nicholas, who was amazing, and Sue Hoyle, who was absolutely brilliant, and then came here as general manager. I've had wonderful support. That support is more questioning now, and I'm not angry. Isn't that weird? I'm not angry. I actually am very, very much loving this last season with the dancers. They're dancing superbly for me. They know that I care for them, and they know that the audiences care for them. And people have said what you're saying now, all up and down the country. But I think of this tour and this year as a celebration of how far I've managed to push myself until I feel able to get people to a standard that I really love. And I will go on doing that somewhere. I will go on. I'm not going to go home and hang my socks up. I want to make dance. I mean, when I was 70 last year, I had a little quick look to see what people had done when they were 70. Balanchine did Jules, a full evening, and did some amazing dances after that. Ashton did a lot of really good work after 70. I think at 70 he was asked quietly but firmly to leave the Royal Ballet. So I've lasted. I'm 75, aren't I? 71. No, I'm 71. I've outlasted Fred. I think my greatest fear is when I see people. I can remember Madame Rambert, who, when she handed the company over, which was a very generous thing, extraordinary thing that she did, she handed it over and allowed it to change. But when she handed over that daily activity, she became an older person before, I remember really before my very eyes. She became more frail, and eventually she became very forgetful. The only wonderful thing was that I was hugely fond of her, and when I was at Rambert, I used to invite her into the studio whenever it was appropriate. And when she came into the studio, she was absolutely on the ball, bright as a button. She would be so anxious about coming, her housekeeper would say she'd actually get the bus fare and sit in her hallway the day before. And I would love to think that I've got work dances to make, that I have other companies. There are other companies. I've been working a bit in America. The American audiences seem to really like the work I do. These things I'm very grateful for. I've had a good time. I've had a long time. My question is that actually I wish that the funding bodies understood how goddamn valuable mature artists are. It's wonderful that dance is for the young, and I love young dancers, and I'm very involved with youth dance through Youth Dance England. But it devastated me when Trisha Brown had to stop making dance at 70, and it. I will not be choreographing when I'm 90. I'm no Merce Cunningham. I couldn't be that focused and obsessive. There are other things in life which I love. But I do love making dance, and I love being in the studio with young people, and that hasn't changed at all.
Can I chip in?
Quite tricky.
No, can I chip in?
Oh, you certainly can, yes.
One of I think both of us have turned around very fully and said that dance, movement, action, the body, change should matter to every single individual because it's what we're having to sort of encompass. But dance, in order to reach a fully comprehensive art form, does need its elders to continue in much the same way as it does in the art forms. Not necessarily because we know better, but there's a continuous line of learning, of accomplishment, of achievement, that if you cut it too quickly, it's genuinely not there and it's not usable. So I, for one, got to know Richard when I was 17, 18, and we are now something. And I just feel utterly thrilled that I know this man and that I wish him to make the best of works in the future, and I think we need to encourage him to do that.
Thank you. I think we should probably finish there, but I just want to share with you something. I got a knighthood last year, to my astonishment, and when I was kneeling, which at the time was quite tricky because I had a ruptured Achilles, the Prince of Wales bent over to me and said, "I hope this encourages you." I felt about 12 years old, which I loved. So it just remains for me to say to all of you people on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us in this really remarkable building. It is a remarkable place. And if you're in London and you want to have an exciting evening, pop in here. But I also want to thank Sue, who, and again, when we're talking about people learning through their lives, all you had to do, I have to talk about the performance tonight, even though you didn't see it on Facebook. You just look at Sue performing tonight and you understand that people learn and become more and more extraordinary. She was amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you.